Welcome to the London Commercial Offices podcast with me, your host, Steve Berridge, Managing Director at Fidgens Cost Management. This is a podcast where we share the stories, career paths, lessons and insights from some of the industry's most influential people. Anything contained within our podcast should not be considered professional advice, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe or follow buttons to ensure you don't miss any of the amazing guests we've got coming up. It also really helps us grow the show. Thanks. Today we're joined by Kara Thompson, Head of UK at Faction Consulting. Faction is a global advisory and project management business with offices in London and Australia, providing a range of services for clients across multiple sectors. Without further ado, Kara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. Delighted to be here. Felt a privilege to be invited after seeing the guests that you've had on the show previously.
No, it's my privilege. Thank you for coming on. So you'll know from previous episodes that we like to start right back at the beginning. So how far back are we going today? I know we spoke offline about you being an overachiever at school, which is something I can't relate to. So should we go back to school?
Yeah, back to school. I guess for those who don't know me or can hear that I've lost my Australian twang.
There's still a twang.
Still a twang. It's certain words, probably like data, which we'll come to at some stage. Born in Australia, grew up in a country-ish town called Toowoomba. For those who know it, it's named the Garden City, but it's about 3 hours west of Brisbane. Quite small and picks up a lot of the rural West Queensland towns where all of the kids come into school. So it's quite a big school hub, both paid schools and government paid schools there. So ended up going to one of those state schools, government school, which was really well known for sport. So played a lot of sport at school, all different sports. I would have loved to play volleyball for Australia, but unfortunately I'm only 171 centimetres, so probably about 50 centimetres too short to even make the cut. But played a range of sports, did really well at school, was school captain. Back to that overachieving part, always felt, I guess, as the eldest child of 4, that you had to, somehow compete with everyone. And I'm sure if you met anyone in my personal life, they'll probably say my middle name is competition. So kind of somehow born with that in the blood. My parents owned their own business in my early teens, which was a fishing tackle store in Toowoomba.
No real estate connection at all.
No real estate connection. It was, as I said, a countryish town that had no water and was 3 hours from any kind of coastline, but surrounded by a lot of freshwater dams. And there was a business, an established fishing tackle store business that probably back in the day did something like $1 million a year. And my parents thought they love fishing, passionate about fishing. Our Sunday afternoons was fishing growing up, that they would start a fishing tackle store in a very small town against the big player and, built and grew a very well established kind of family business that did very well against competition. So probably slightly inspired by them. Never really had any ambition to have my own business, but saw them, I guess, just follow their passion and do something that they love and help others enjoy what would say a hobby, but is also professional sport. For those who follow the fishing business in Australia, probably have seen my mum compete, but also write for some of the fishing magazines, which is quite exceptional. So anyway, grew up in a town, probably inspired by my parents, competed with my siblings, and probably set some of the theme of when you look back now.
There's a lot of early sort of
today.
Developmental lessons there, sort of following passion, grit, competition, striving. There's a lot of foundational things there. It would certainly be a benefit for you going forward.
Yeah. I look, I guess, then to my next stage. And I don't know, it's hard when you look at, the kids coming out of school now. It seems like with social media, there's a lot more opportunity to see a lot more careers. Whilst maybe when, Steve, we're similar ages, we're at school, for us in Toowoomba as a female, you could be a teenager, social worker, psychologist.
Or do what your parents do.
Yeah, or do what your parents do. There wasn't that diversity, even when you went to the career discussion and the career fairs. The construction industry or the property industry wasn't even really on the agenda or attainable. So anyway, I ended up off to university to do a science degree. I majored in biology and psychology and thought I'll golf and swim with the dolphins. Whilst I was still hunting my volleyball career, despite
hunting
not growing
those extra 50 centimetres that you were never going to get.
Yeah, despite not actually probably growing any taller from the age of 15, I was still like, it might happen. So continued on with the sport throughout university. Very early on into that degree, realised I don't want to do this. you don't know what you're going to do. And I didn't like quitting, so I thought I'll just finish off the degree. In my last year of university, I had the itch to move out of Toowoomba. I went to Brisbane. I lived with my grandma, worked part-time and finished off my degree remotely, which I think at the time was a really weird concept for a lot of my friends and peers. Now, I think that's almost the default or the wanted default.
How did that work? Because obviously back then there wouldn't have been the whole everything remote via Teams and lectures online. Was it a case of you just read what you needed to read in Brisbane and travelled back to do tests, or
travel back to do the tests? I think one test they held in a university close from memory, but a lot of it was that self-motivation. You had to read everything, learn everything, and then do your assignments and tests. So, but I was enjoying being out of Toowoomba. I probably, as I said, when you look back now at your life, kind of felt the itch to have a bit of a challenge and do something different. So went to the Big Smoke, which probably at the time Brisbane was like 1 million people and was a huge city and ready for something different. So I finished my university degree, didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was at a time in Australia where you could pretty much get any job and not really be qualified. So I recall interviewing for a head of marketing role and they offered me the job. So I did
Did you take that role?
I didn't take that job, no. I thought that was probably a bit too far. I managed to secure an admin role, like project coordinator role, supporting the project team that was building the Red Cross blood bank in Australia. It was in Brisbane. It was towards the end of the project. So I got to see a bit of commissioning and it's kind of like, oh, this project stuff seems a bit cool. Moved on to then a technology firm doing another admin role, which morphed into a bit of a facilities management role. And then the company moved their HQ. So I got involved in
the relocation,
helping them set up their relocation. And we hired a project management team. I can't remember exactly when, but early on in that project, I was like, okay, job really isn't for me. I don't really know what I want to do. Maybe this project stuff seems a bit exciting. I'll explore maybe getting a consultancy role. Didn't really understand it apart from what I'd seen from the team that were delivering on the project.
Was that relocation out of the ground? Was it just an office refit? What was the project?
So it was, the developer was doing a new build, and in Australia there's a lot of integrated fit outs because one, it's a more sustainable solution. When you're building a building, you might as well build the tenants fit out as you go. Also helps all the pre-lets are done and it gives confidence in the developments rather than spec. It saves wastage, and the alternate option is that it's finished to a shell and core and a tenant takes that. So it was an integrated fit out and obviously representing the tenant client going in, which is a standard practice. Quite surprised when I moved over to the UK. We'll get
this
a
wasteful
bit more to that
later
later.
Seems to be across the market.
Yeah, I'll probably try and not get too angry about that for anyone who actually knows me and listening to this.
We have got a separate episode on that we did with Ella a few months ago on that exact topic.
It's a topic in itself. Yeah, so basically I thought I'll give this a crack. Didn't know where I was going to start. It was at a time in the market, probably much similar to the UK, where if you were non-cog, you didn't really get a role in the industry. It was built environment degrees, even though I had a science degree. So I thought I'll just resign from my job and work it all out. And I remember kind of, speaking to my boyfriend at the time and also my mum, and they're like, oh, you'll work it out. And I was like, well, I'll just go work in a supermarket if I can't get a job, work something out. And then basically when the project management firm that was working on the project found out I was leaving, they called me up and offered me a baby PM role.
I thought you were going to say they called off you head of project management.
Gary Finnegan, who is our global CEO for Faction, which we'll come to later on, saw something in me and thought, I'm going to give this girl at the time probably a crack and see how she goes. And then so I joined a company called Incoll, which was a tier 1 project management company at the time in Australia. And about 2 years after that, Savills bought Incoll whilst I was still there in Brisbane.
And what, so in times wise, dates?
I think the acquisition probably was like 2010, maybe 2009, maybe 2011, around about that time. Yeah, I mean, it was super exciting. All of a sudden you're part of a big propco, didn't really understand what that meant. The property industry was still relatively new to me. I was fortunate enough to work on school upgrade and affordable housing projects when I first started at Incoll. So, the downturn really didn't hit Australia, but at the time they did invest money into, government projects. So got to build a new library, do a massive sports hall, which was super exciting. I was traveling up to Atherton, Paperlands, which is like North Queensland. So I'd spend about 2 days traveling to do a 1 hour site meeting. But, there were for people who were disadvantaged and, needed special accommodation built. So it was great because I was working on lots of little projects. And I did look at some of my colleagues at the time that were doing the big shiny new build towers and, maybe like the fancy pubs up on the waterfront. I think when I look back on it, it was beneficial to my career because I got to manage a lot of different teams, procuring the professional team, the design, the contractor. So I had lots of experience early on rather than just working on one big project with one professional team. But I also saw, I guess, when I look back at that now, even if it was just upgrading a library, the impact that had, or 2 units that had complete, DDA accessible, for someone who isn't body abled, the impact that made. So, and the role that I played in that, which was super exciting. So had the opportunity to do it as a secondment into the government on a couple of projects and, just a range of experience. And I vaguely remember Jeremy Hillsby, who was the CEO of Savills at the time, came over and gave a big speech about Savills. And I was like, oh, I want to go to London. And some of my colleagues were thinking of going to Asia. And I always had this ambition to, push myself and do a 2-year working holiday overseas. I was fortunate at the time, had half a townhouse, had 2 cars, spent time with friends on the weekend doing jet skiing and fishing and, but I was 26 and I was like, could see like my entire life in front of me. I think then was such a young age. Anyway, wasn't a good time to consider coming over to the UK, but managed with the support of some existing relationships, like business relationships, and also some special people that supported a relocation over to London with Savills, which was super exciting in early 2012. So year of the Olympics.
So you land in London 2012 with Savills.
Year of the Olympics, Queen Jubilee, and I love the Queen. And it was like a kid in a candy shop. This country kind of girl from Australia literally goes straight into like black tie dinners in Mayfair, Finos off Berkeley Square, lunches. Obviously work, there was a lot of work, but it was just like, wow, this industry is completely different to Australia. And what an amazing city to be in. And we were traveling to Rome on the weekends and city breaks to Paris. And all of a sudden, Europe, which was just not accessible, was immediately accessible. So from a professional and a personal, it was just like there was just so much, and probably even still, now 13 years on, still haven't done enough. There's just so much that the city in Europe has to offer. So, found myself at Grosvenor Hill, at Savills, working with some of the industry greats that we see now. I was so fortunate.
When you were coming over, was that with a 2-year mindset? You were coming over, I'm going to say play in London, but, spread your wings.
Yeah.
Always with the intention to go home again.
Yeah, I was engaged at the time and we'd booked the wedding venue and planned the house, and I only had a working holiday visa, so I didn't even have a long-term intention. So 100% was like, just going to do the 2 years and go back. I fell in love with the built environment, particularly in London, but across the UK. I probably am still, but certainly was then addicted to the challenge of living away from home. WhatsApp and technology certainly helps with that now. I think can't keep up with the family WhatsApp groups, but that gives some connection. But, it's a challenge. And then I look back kind of through my career and I was like, I always was just need to push myself. And sometimes I go home going, why am I like this? And why can I not just not have to be challenged all the time? But yeah, it was hard. I was, qualified in Australia, but not in this country. There is however many different types of brick bonds. It was like learning a whole different world. The heritage element alone. You're talking about a country that whilst has, 40,000 years of age, was only established, in a different way less than 200 years ago. So, the age of the buildings you're walking into. And I recall my first week, Savills, walking down the road, Simon Collett, who's listening to this, and we walked through St. James's Park. And then all of a sudden, it's like Buckingham Palace. I was like, honestly, I'll never forget the day. It gives me goosebumps now. It's like Buckingham Palace. I hadn't seen it yet because landed in the country and started work the week after. He's like, yeah, we got a meeting around the corner at Victoria. And you have no concept of space when you first move to London. You get on a tube and you go 2 stops, you think it's so far away, and actually you can walk that.
That is very true, because I remember early in my career, I was, darting all around town on the tube. Because because you didn't have money for taxis, and you wouldn't expense those, back in the day. It took me a long time to get my bearings above ground, because you were like a rabbit. You were just popping your head up in different parts of London, back underground, back to the office. So I get that.
It was so funny. So I had this moment, and like let alone all the buildings that we'd walk past, like the Ritz, like didn't quite capture the grandeur of those buildings, but it's just completely different for those who've been to even Brisbane or Sydney. You just can't compare. And I guess you look at London, and it's so special. Paris has the symmetry and the architecture, and the old, is really valued and celebrated. And then you have New York, it's massive, it's grand, it's, and then you kind of have London, which almost seems to be like a mix of the two. And I mean, everyone knows what it's like when you walk out of bank and you've got the Ned behind you and you're looking up, and that contrast, particularly on a blue sky day, where London does look a lot different. It's just so beautiful seeing that old and new together, and you just think, where else in the world do you really get that? And we work in the built environment, I think that's almost addictive at any one time. It also means when you go to a hotel room, you can't really stop but notice all the defects.
Well, that's
problem.
That's part of the issue with our industry. You do take your work home with you. So talk to me about your 10 years at Savills in total, thereabouts.
Yeah.
Could you just talk to me sort of briefly about, your career path within Savills whilst you were there? Obviously, it was only ever supposed to be 2 years in terms of in London. So how did you evolve within Savills over that period of time?
I mean, I was incredibly supported, despite kind of not growing up in this country, not within the school groups, not within the university groups. I was me, and that I guess initially might have probably been a bit challenging. I struggled with, I guess, the backwardness of the UK. I saw London as like the best in the world and must be leading in every field. And I felt like when I started working and understanding the regulations, I felt like it was incredibly backward. And I know we're seeing some of those changes in regulations, like the new act implemented. But, I had something like 80% of my projects on BIM back in 2011. I think even now we're not embracing technologies even a decade on. So it was such a hard contrast. And I guess being Australian, we're typically direct, and I struggled with that cultural clash. And there was probably, I'm sure my bosses, if they're listening to this, there was a bit of fine tuning. So I think like initially for the first 3 months, I was like, what have I done? And I'm going to go back. Like, this is just crazy. But I'm not really a quitter. So I guess, stuck with it. But I had an incredible time at Savills. I have some of my bestest friends still there. I'm godmother to one of the PAs who's still there's, daughter. I spend a lot of time with people who are still there, and they really did become like, family to me. And, it was incredible business. I joined at a time that the market, was coming out of, the biggest crash we've seen probably in 25 years. Mark Ridley, was ambitious to see cross-selling. So I think at the time there was something like 1 or 2 divisions cross-sold across the business. And then, by the time I left, all 20, were cross-selling. So, under that leadership and under that growth, I saw a phenomenal opportunity, and to be a part of that business through that time has helped shape who I am today. And I was speaking to someone yesterday over a coffee, and, I credit a lot of that foundation and that success to the people I worked with, both within the division, outside the division, the mentors I had. It's a phenomenal business, and it's a business that, if you cut me open, I probably still would bleed yellow. I've still worked with some of the people in other, divisions such as planning and heritage. Now, it was a business that, it was very hard to make a decision to leave from, if that makes sense.
So let's talk about that decision. So we're sort of 2019, I think. So you've been at Savills for circa 10 years. And I could tell by the grin from, people can't see this because it's audio, but the grin from ear to ear, when you talk about Savills, how favourably you still think about it. But what was going through your mind then, leading up to that exit point? Were you actively looking to move on for a different challenge? Was there aspects of day to day that you didn't agree with or weren't happy with? Where was your head at?
I wasn't actively looking to leave, no. I think I wanted to stay within the business. And I think it was probably born initially from just not maybe being challenged quite enough. And I don't know if that was in the projects that I was working on, managing a bigger team or a team. It's an incredible business that works really well together, but then you're out kind of without the big brand. Who are you as a kind of professional? You can't really pinpoint all of that. It was an incredibly inspiring business. So it wasn't that I didn't have any issues around that. And I believed in the business model and the culture and that's hugely successful for them. And it was probably, if I look at it, there was probably like an 18-month period where some of that was like trying to find my way and working with my bosses and the business at the time about what that looks like. That kind of, look, I really just am not feeling challenged enough, and how do I find my path? And there was, incredible support and lots of discussions. And I actually went off and had a bit of a sabbatical at the back end of 18, spent a month in Canada on my own Jeep in a rooftop tent and the black bears coming out of hibernation. I hiked the GR20 solo, spent some time with some family, did, that kind of stuff. And I knew then that I certainly wanted to still be in the UK and be in London. I thought that was an important decision, like at that career milestone. And I guess whilst I'm sure the challenging path and the opportunity would have been there in somewhat form, I felt it was time to depart the business, and one that I'd probably be back there in a heartbeat. But it's a decision that I don't regret and I feel was the right one for me, because then what I had next challenged me certainly in ways that I probably wouldn't have been challenged if I had stayed there. I left with great sadness, to be honest, and as I said, I don't regret the decision. I'm happy with my decision, but it was not easy. It was not easy.
A difficult
it took a long
move
time.
To make.
Yeah, and it was a very hard move to make.
We're now looking at 2019, left Savills.
Yep.
And joined
Gleeds.
So where did the opportunity come from?
Got back from my travels, and particularly the hike. I finished the hike last, and I got back to the market, and it was probably about August, so summer holidays. And I did a little presentation of who I am. I didn't really like the traditional CV, so I decided to do something different. And then I just thought, I'm going to go out to the market, approach people, ask recruiters, see what's online. It was across consultancy roles, client side roles, some newish startups. It was an incredible few months, met some great people, some that I'm still in contact with now. Was fortunate enough to get a fair few job offers through that time. Came down to 2 in the end, and one was a Gleeds role. It was a very difficult one to select. One, because I guess I'm quite a traditional PM when it comes down to it, and I like the independency of the PM. And I was, Gleeds is a cost management and consultancy business, so I wasn't sure about that. But ultimately, I picked the role because it presented as the hardest one.
Back to the challenge.
Yeah, back to challenge again. I picked it, and geez, it was a whole nother world. I was very privileged at Savills, and being a part of an amazing, successful business that operated in a certain way and did certain things. And all of a sudden found myself in a completely different business, well established, had their history, like Savills, also branded in a similar color. Found that quite entertaining, but it was a completely different world. I really loved that, to be honest. It was the challenge of being at Savills, where, I was really supported. I had a lot of friends there, did a lot of good work with a lot of people, but all of a sudden, you're basically no one. When you start a new job, you go from being like an expert and someone needs you to, who is this person? It's an incredible business, and hugely successful in its history. And I was brought in to take over the London project management team at a time where there was a lot of change within the business. They had John Dedman leading the London office. They were bringing in Douglas McCormack to run the UK and make some changes for investment in the future, which has done the business well since. But the team, with all the bones, were not performing in the way the business needed to. And so it wasn't just come in and lead a team. It was like, we need to improve revenue, improve profitability, project delivery, a myriad of things. Kind of walked into probably the most optimum role for me. It was incredibly challenging. The team had seen probably a few leaders before me in quick succession, so I was not welcomed by them. And I'm working with a few of them now, and they'll attest to this. People were not happy that there was another head of team there. And I had a very quick window to win them all over. So I had like a 100-day plan. It might have been a 90-day plan, which the business supported me on and I implemented. It was incredibly challenging. And about 6 months after I started, COVID hit. So now I had to lead this team pretty much remotely, at least for a good 6 months until we were allowed to kind of come back to site and be in the office properly. As you know, we still had to certify stuff. So we were not entirely fully stuck in our houses for 2 years, but there was a period of time where there was no contact.
Would have added further complexity to the challenges that you were facing already, particularly around the people side in terms of getting them on side, because it's very hard to build that bond remotely, right?
Yeah. And it was, I can't work from home now because I get triggered about it because, it was kitchen table in my bedroom trying to lead a team of 30 people to increase revenue and profitability and delivery. It didn't stop, and it was constant. And, doing that on Teams, we still see a bit of that back-to-back nature, but it was like we just became obsessed with being in these meetings and this over connectivity, which, it was just crazy. Like the face-to-face physical world you can't operate that way. We did it for a period of time and we did it successfully. We grew the team, we reshaped the team, increased the revenue. We did increase profitability slightly. It was hard, from the position that the team were in, but we won a £400 million mixed use scheme. We came second on a tower to G&T. That's a career highlight to me. We were really, flying as a team, and I was so proud of them. It was so hard and I pushed them so hard. And when they thought they'd achieved a lot, I pushed them even further. But they were an incredibly ambitious and special group of people, some of which I'm working with now, some I see outside of it, some I may never speak with again, but they were really something special. Yeah, that was also a hard decision to walk away from a really high-performing team in the end.
What was the driving force between looking for your next opportunity after Gleeds?
I was approached by a client. So
an existing client
an existing client. They knew that I was ambitious around project management. I would see a gap in the market. I was working on a lot of distressed projects, personally. And that was, there was a lot of things that were happening that we were fixing that could be avoided. And so I started to really form, a vision for, an independent, bespoke kind of project management offering in a way that is a different business model to the traditional consultancies, in a way that pushes the boundaries, that people don't accept the status quo, all those things. And I guess they had something that was distressed that they needed support on and said, look, come on board and we'll back you to do something and we'll, work it all out together. I guess I felt that Gleeds had a great ambition and vision, maybe a bit of recency and lifetime. And I think I felt like I was there for a reason. As I left the business, amicably, we all kind of acknowledge that and, wish obviously that business very well in its endeavors still. But yeah, basically went to Vengrove for a period of time, worked on an iconic project in Wardour Street. That was definitely up there. And as far as my career highlights, they're a value add like investment funds. So I got to be a DM for a little while, understand IRRs and all sorts of stuff that I knew about and you'd seen development appraisals, but actually really understand how it works. And, the business there has the life cycle, so including the asset managers. So I really got to work alongside and understand a really different way or piece of the life cycle. That was a real privilege to see. And that business, well, you walk in there and, talk about ambitious and inspirational. I always thought, oh, okay, I'm an overachiever and I'm doing pretty well. And then you walk into that business and you're like, wow, I've got to really pull my bloody socks up. And that was really,
that would have suited really good. You though, I would have thought, in terms of that environment. So you kind of, right, okay, must try harder.
Yeah, 100%. And Ross and Andrew there, they are incredibly, smart at different levels, and it's, and the team that work there, challenging, but also inspiring again to kind of be in a completely different environment. So I guess ultimately, whilst it was a short stint there, because I felt consultancy, whilst it was successful and our vision was aligned, needed that complete independence.
So your role at Vengrove was essentially offering that consultancy role, but internally, if that makes sense. And your view is actually that you'd rather be completely independent.
Yeah, we did have some external clients, which was good. It showed that the model could work, but I think I didn't feel like the market was mature enough completely for that model, and, felt for me that complete independence was probably the way to go. My own personal career, I needed to know if I could do it from a clean piece of paper, if that makes sense, like completely 0 to 1.
So as in building something yourself, the ultimate.
Yeah, not as a
challenge.
KaraThompson.com, not as like a one person, but as a, can I take something from 0 and make it something, both not just financially and projects and clients, but culturally.
Culture, right? That's what I was going to say. With everything you believe running through it.
Oh, Gary Finnegan, who I mentioned before. He'd actually been hunting me for about 5 years.
I hadn't realised that it was Gary
Savills.
day one, and that it'd come back full circle.
Yeah, and Bob Miniken, who, was a part of the original business, is now a non-exec director. Like, honestly, I could have a whole podcast on Bob and how he's inspired me and supported me through my career, but they just wouldn't let up. And they were just like, come on, Kara, let's do something. And, we back you. We're going to, give you that platform, give you the investment to start team, so it's not starting as one person. You can actually launch with 3 people and try and do something really different. We didn't bring any clients with us. We didn't set up any work to come. It was literally like 3 people. That's going to cost money for a while, and start something from scratch. The backing of the Australian business, which we now have restructured and we have a parent company, but with the backing of that business, with some branding, with the support, the mentorship, but actually a startup here, which again, doing that May 23, getting through 24. And I know no one can see the greys on this video. I got a lot last year.
Last year it was survive to 25. That was last year. So, I mean, just for those in the market that don't know, could you just give us a sort of a brief overview of Faction, predominantly an Australian-based business?
Yeah, Australian founded 8 years ago. We set up the UK business from an investment loan, which was nice. And we've got to pay it back, but we launched officially in June 23. But yeah, basically now set up a parent company, and, we'd love to have, some other global locations. As a business, the model is completely set up differently. Traditional consultancies, operate at 100 plus resource allocation, in my experience. I know, Steve, you've had your own experiences, but really trying to hunt the people down. So hire the right people in, and then the opportunities will follow the right people. So there's about 7,500 PMs in the UK, for example. We only want the top 1%. There's probably only 75. We're not going to get all of those either. We want that top echelon, or people who want to be in that top echelon. And it's about the person. Gary could have started a UK business 5, 10, whenever he wanted to do that. But he waited because he wanted me. He wanted specifically me. And that's kind of how the business model is set up. There is then like a community of people. Some have come and gone in Australia and come back. And there's people that want to work on specific projects. So they're on the books for when that specific project comes along. People who want to join our business where we've agreed terms. But when the right opportunity comes along, they will,
it's about the right person for the right project, as opposed to here's a load of project managers that we've got. Yeah. And of course, they're right for every project, and their skill set's absolutely right for those different sectors. Yeah. So are you completely sector agnostic? Yeah. Commercially biased?
We traditionally, just with the team makeup, we're probably a bit more commercially biased, but we work across all sectors and have had quite a bit of diverse experience in the sectors to date, but also in the service lines we provide. I hate the word service lines, but we're doing a tenant monitoring role at the moment. We're doing a fund monitoring role. We're doing a project on behalf of landlords, hotel operators. Like, we're operating quite like different spaces. That is the Faction model. We have our scope of services, but we very rarely just say, here's the scope, here's the fee. It's like, what do you need? Who do you need? What's the project? What building are you trying to buy? Or what are you trying to achieve? And then we try and get the right people and the right skill set to align completely with that. In a way, we don't hunt sectors, we're hunting clients. And then we want the clients that don't want postbox PMs, that they want PMs that will have an opinion, that will advise them, that will put recommendations down, that will challenge them, that will say, you want to deliver this program. These are when you need to make the decisions, and hold them accountable for that. We can save a month on the program if we do something a different way, and clients actually want to look at that, rather than kind of trying to just beat the same drum and not get a different outcome. That's not the business. And that's something that particularly like Gary and I are very aligned and passionate about. We don't want to just put someone into a job because that's the resource availability. On the flip side, that is a challenge because it's a model that on average, we don't want anyone to be any more than 90% billable. You have to really look at how, we've still got to compete in the market. We can't just bill more because we feel we're more valuable.
And I think that's about working, and we've been thinking about this internally, it's about working with the right clients, and every client isn't right for us, and it sounds like it isn't right for your business model either. There are some clients that actually value PM sitting in a room doing post-box PM work, and that's what they're used to. And there's no right or wrong. And it's about having the ability as a business to be sort of steadfast in that conviction and say no to clients, which, especially if you're starting a business, I can imagine it's incredibly challenging, but it's about sticking to your, and we talked previously about Simon Sinek, about sticking to your why. Why are you doing it? And trying to ensure that the business decisions that you're making, especially in these early years, are in alignment with that.
Steve, it's hard. Like, I went on a shoot about 18 months ago, and I remember meeting a couple of other founders of a business. They're about 2 or 3 years old, and they're like, Kara, when it comes tight to money, you'll compromise on your laurels. And like, obviously at the time I was like, absolutely not. There have been moments where you're like, wow, I can see what they mean, and the choice you make is a harder path. Nearly 2 years on, I'm really proud of the decisions we have made. Obviously, there's some trial and error in there and some teething problems inside a business, in particular what was a very difficult market, but there's an incredible amount of opportunity there. And we're working with some incredible clients at the moment, really inspirational, and they want to do great things and they want to fill the gaps in the market as well. They pay people on time. They value the professional team. They look at things differently and go, actually, we've got to do stage approvals and we have a really difficult stakeholder. And we talk about how we're going to manage that and manage a professional team early on, rather than kind of being like, oh, we need 20 revisions on stage 2 and not want to pay anyone for it. Like, it's just that, you've got to look at the appraisals. Land value is not changing. The yields aren't really going to change. And construction costs, you're going to tell everyone, is not going down. We've got to look at things differently and try and do things differently to make the appraisals stack up, whatever the ambitions of the clients are to achieve. And we really want to do things differently. And, we talk about being disruptive and we talk about being different and all that kind of stuff. We still administer a contract and we still have to do our risk registers, but actually really having enough, kind of being brave enough to be like, look, let's just not just say yes because it's easy, if that makes sense. Like, other companies have quicker programs than me and they win jobs because their program's quicker. But I don't ever want a program to go in that I just don't think is not realistic just to win a job. I don't want to do that.
I agree. And I think a big part of that, I come back to it, a big part of that is working with the right clients. It's one of the things, I've had clients where we'll be in an interview and I'm trying to explain to them the value that a QS can add to a project. If you're the type of client where you need to be persuaded, then you're not the right type of client for us. We want to work with clients that understand the value that we can bring to the table, and not just us, but other people in the process. And a big part of that, and we talked about it previously, is it's the trust and the empathy piece, not just within a project, but I think within the industry. Currently, and I see it day to day, it's people are turning up to the table and they're still concerned with their interests, whether they say otherwise. And everyone says, oh, we're all about collaboration. But ultimately, typically, there's a client sitting there that's interested in them. There's an M&E, there's an architect, there's a QS, there's a contractor and a subcontractor. They make the right noises around the table, but their actions speak louder than words, and they're still very self-interested. And
I'd love to come into a DTM. The professional team have spoken to each other since the last meeting, and it's like, oh, we've actually got some more NAA, or we've done this, or we've saved some money, or we've done this. Like, I would love to have that feeling for our clients that deserve better. And that's the foundations of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to build a team of advisors that really push the professional team to perform better, but also manage a client in a way where there's alignment. And I think I shared on my LinkedIn a year or so ago, a video around the Chilean miners. A myriad of groups, never spoken to each other, never known each other before, got together to get those Chilean miners out, which they did successfully. And there's a great story behind that. They then did the same pilot with planners, developers, professional teams, blah, 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 to try and create a master plan of the city. And guess what? It was a completely failed exercise. And that probably sums up a bit about our industry at the moment, that there's a lot of challenges and a lot of agendas and a lot of conflicting pieces of information, and collaboration and innovation itself has just kind of gone out the window.
Until you get a team of people that trust each other and truly trust that the person opposite them is interested in them achieving their own goals.
Yeah.
That innovation is completely restricted because why would you? Innovation requires a safe environment.
And I feel like COVID's had a negative impact in that regard, because whilst we all got on Teams and we all did stuff and we kept moving forward, we lost that personal connectivity. And, our DTMs all in person. We can't do hybrid. Everyone's got to talk to each other before we go into the room. Everyone's got to talk to each other after we get out of the room. There's got to be that pulling out a plan and really trying to just do some of those basics really well again. And that everyone's might be having a tough day personally, or their bosses got them needs to do like 20 different reports at the end of the day. Like everyone has that pressure. And your point about empathy, like actually really going, is that email I'm about to send going to really
helping or hurting?
Or hurt? And don't get me wrong, I'm a very punchy Australian, and I've probably sent emails that I reflect back on and think that was probably not the impression that I wanted to give when I sent that email. Like, I think we've all done it, but just for an example, I think it's a way of really the way we communicate and the way we support each other, maybe for success, and that everyone's got different objectives. Everyone's boss has a different agenda, and you've got this group of people that have got to come together. They get paid by different people, they get paid late, or they don't get paid enough, or like all of that kind of stuff. Everyone's motivated completely differently. And all of a sudden, you've got this situation where you've got to try and achieve the same agenda and objective with the client, alongside. And I think that could be done so much better, and not even with complicated software and tools, but just in how our attitudes are. And that's at Faction and what we as a discipline want to see. I hate hearing half of the project managers are crap. I mean, probably right. But, I want to go to a black tie dinner in 10 years time and someone say, oh, PMs, oh yeah, man, they're so good as a discipline. And not just Faction, like the whole industry. I want the whole industry of PMs. I want my competition to be nailing it. I want us all to be like, if we can get it right and be better, and clients can get it right and be better, and the professional teams are performing, we could transform this really archaic, broken industry.
We could have an industry in 100 years, which
100%.
Current trajectory in terms of, it's almost, I can't remember we spoke about it, kind of the measuring the trust and empathy score of the market on a quarterly basis, and it's pull everyone into a room, run a survey, let's find out, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? And see how we're tracking that over the next 10 years. And QSing, PMing, it's almost becoming a bit of a commodity. There's a benchmark, there's a delivery standard that everybody needs to hit. We need to, we need to be providing good professional advice, but it's the bit on top of that. It's the soft bit that is where the real success is there to be gained, about getting all those different people working, trusting each other, working better together. That's where the value is going to be created. That's where clients are going to have projects built better, faster, more competitively. That's where contractor margins are going to increase. That's where subcontractors are going to get paid quicker. That's where, because we trust each other, that our over-reliance on ridiculously complicated contract amendments and risk transfer almost goes away on the basis of everyone at the table trusts each other. And it's about how, and I know that you're dead passionate, about this topic. It's about working with the right clients and the right teams that believe in that, genuinely believe in that, and want to help move that needle.
Yeah, and really, I think the trust is so important. Simple things like when the contractor trusts me, they're open about the challenges that come on site, and therefore we can resolve it together. But when there's no trust, that opportunity is not there. And we have a role to play in that for sure. And I think you get those teams, and if the magic can happen, high performing, high loving, can take over the world. And I think that as the professional team is an objective, not just like for Faction and our team, but the actual professional team that we play a role in. And I'd love to see that move at pace, Steve. I really would.
Look, we're kind of running sort of to the end of the hour. Talk to me about the year ahead. Worries, concerns, challenges, and then what we can do is get you back on in 12 months, and then we can reflect upon how that's actually turned out in practice.
That's hopefully if someone's, wants to listen to this, it's worth the recording again. But 2025, 2024 was brutal. We knew it was going to be, but I think there was a reality, a life reality, not just like an industry-led reality, but like the cost of everything going up. It's not going to change at all. And I think that we're probably past that. And we're now like, okay, challenging times, need to work hard. We as a team worked really hard last year, and we've actually had quite a nice start to the year, but it's been mixed. I've met people who've said really tough out there, and there are redundancies being made, which we've seen in some of the disciplines. There has been a lot more activity. So this time last year, challenging pipeline. I'm pretty sure everyone would agree. There's more of that this year, which is exciting, which just seems that there's been more activity, but we're not complacent. I think we're still probably got quite a tough year. I think planning challenges, regulatory challenges, which I'm all supportive of, but I think that doesn't make developments attractive. There's certainly opportunities and gaps in the market, and you can see some people hunting for that, but stage approvals, delays, I think we had a very simple list of building consent. Something that should have taken probably like 13 weeks took like 20 weeks, like just simple things take longer, and that doesn't help. So it would be great if we saw some actual reform around probably planning, and probably if someone in the government's listening to that would be really great. I think we can't control a lot of those things. It would be great if the professional team and everything we could control would make things better, and we could be more efficient and more effective against some of those challenges. I'd like to see that, but I don't know, I think there'll be probably some still big news. We'll probably see a tier one maybe go. I think there's still some real challenges financially out in the market, as we know has a I don't know, I actually feel good about 2025. I feel determined. Last year was probably a bit about perseverance and probably just surviving.
Perseverance with a hint of optimism.
Yeah, I think there's probably that there, but I'm no economist, and we had a slow kind of band-aid ripping off. Probably 224 is at the bottom of the market, maybe not. We'd like to think so, but we didn't have the bust, so we're not really going to have the boom. So I think there's probably a reality that we still got a couple of tough years, I think, really, to be in a place where we can not be reviewing the financials like every time before we go to bed. Not sure if you agree, Steve, or it's quite a...
No, listen, I do. I said last year was a challenging year on all fronts. Survived to 25. Interestingly, sort of the first 2 weeks of Jan for us, we were looking around thinking this is like November, December 24. Nothing's changed. But actually, the back end of January, we did notice a big uptick.
Right.
And whether that was just waiting for people to come back and get their sort of feet under the desk, it's definitely feels more positive this year than last year. I think for us, and we talked about it. Our focus is now on trying to do things differently. It's about trying to work with the right clients, and it's slightly harder for us in terms of project hierarchy. Typically we're under a project manager, and if we're then working for a project manager that doesn't necessarily believe in what we believe, and not that ask anybody, they're going to believe in trust and empathy. Of course they are. But it's believe and action are very different things. And
it's doing the do.
Doing the do, and I think that comes down to working with experienced project managers that have confidence in their convictions, that that are willing to stand up to a client almost as part of a bigger cause. You might be working on one project, but we're part of a bigger industry and have a bigger obligation to ensure that we still have an industry that want to work together in 50, 100 years' time. So I think that's our focus. But back to your point, there's still mouths to feed, bills to pay, and a business to run. And it's the challenge is juggling that, and I say having those convictions to make your business decisions with that bigger why at forefront. So that's a big focus for us this year. But look, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation this morning, and I know you had reservations as to whether we'd get past half an hour, and I assured you we have. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Hopefully I haven't bored people too much with my life story.
Not at all. Look, thank you very much for coming on. We'll get you back on in 12 months' time to see how you've got on.
Thanks, Steve.
This podcast is sponsored by Fidgins, a London-based cost consultancy. Please visit fidgins.co.uk to find out more about our market-leading service and some of the amazing clients we get to work with. We're super open to guest recommendations for this podcast, so if there's anyone in the industry you'd like to get on the show, please visit the website or send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll try to make it happen. Thanks, and bye for now.